Very nice.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of John's Motorcycle Rescue and Review. Today I am with Honda's beautiful 1979 CB750 K. And in the late 70s, Honda really kind of found itself with some pretty stiff competition from Suzuki and their GS750. And it really, for a long time, Honda had ruled the roost with their CB750. It was really the only game in town for a four-cylinder 750 from one of the Japanese manufacturers. But when Suzuki came along with their GS750, it really handled well. It had the dual disc brakes up front, so it really braked well. It really kind of set the standard and raised the bar in the 750cc motorcycle market. So in 1979, after over a decade of production, Honda introduced a completely new model, and it was the CB750K. And some of the technical features on this bike: it features a 16-valve head. It also features a 5-speed transmission. It also has the constant velocity carbs, and these are the key-in type, which, if they're sorted out properly, they do fuel very well, very precisely. The 1979 CB750 also had a completely different frame, and the magazine articles of the time said it was the first CB750 that actually handled. And it really does handle nicely. It's a drastic improvement over essentially the first generation CB750. Around the same time period, Honda also introduced the CB750F Super Sport, and it had the same frame, it had the same engine, similar bodywork to this, but not exactly. The CB750K was not as sporting as the CB750F, and as such it has a drum brake in the rear, and it only has a single disc up front. And so what that means is your braking performance is somewhat limited in comparison to the Super Sport model. And this was designed just to be driven by everyday people, not racers, and not people looking for every last ounce of speed. And just meant to function well, to handle nicely, and to be just a really pleasant place to spend the day, a reliable ride. And I think Honda really did a good job with this model. On this particular bike, I have made a few performance upgrades to kind of bring the safety level on it up a bit. I have installed steel braided brake lines. I also replaced the front rotor and brake pads with new units. I did replace the handlebar with a little bit more sporting bend that gives a little bit of a lean to the bars, a little bit wider handlebar with more control. And I also put about a 3/8 inch spacer in the top of the fork tubes here, just above the fork springs. And that actually firms up the ride a little bit in the front, and it keeps it from diving significantly under braking. It really improves the handling of the bike. But how does it ride? After all these years, is it still a nice ride? Is it still a nice place to be? Well, let me put my gear on, I'll bring the camera with me, and we'll find out together. Let's ride.
I am currently riding Honda's 1979 CB750K, and this is kind of Gen 2 of the Honda CB750 line of motorcycles. Has a completely new engine, completely new frame, updated suspension, and this was really heralded as the first CB750 that actually handled. And the K model was more of the everyday rider, the kind of the gentleman's bike, and the Super Sport was more the cafe racer type bike, but they used a lot of the same components. My first impressions of this bike are it is just nice and easy. It's just going down through the countryside right now. We're doing about 55 miles an hour. I have a little bit more of a sporting bar on it, and so my seating position has a little bit of a lean to it. I've also installed this little MGO cafe fairing on it, and it just breaks enough wind that it makes it enjoyable. I could do these speeds all day long in comfort. Clutch action is easy. Shifting is very smooth. Bike picks up revs very nicely. The power band itself is very smooth, and really as the revs pick up above 5,000 RPM, this thing really starts to pull hard. But it's very well carbureted down low. I've done some tweaking on the jetting and a lot of carb cleaning on this bike and getting them set up right. It took me some time, but it's sorted out now. It holds a steady idle, and it just carburetes very, very nicely. This bike has a 4-into-2 exhaust. It's a custom exhaust. I'm sure the originals probably just rotted out over time, and so it sounds nice. They have a little bit more tone, I think, than the originals, but it's certainly not loud or obnoxious. Go through a couple of corners here. Very nice. I've also upgraded the brakes on this with the Spiegler brake lines and more aggressive brake pads and a rebuilt master cylinder. And so the braking performance is much improved, and then the suspension in the front, just, I don't know if you can see, but it doesn't dive much at all now under braking. And the handling on this is very light, and once you have it leaned over, it doesn't want, most bikes want to stand up in a corner, and this thing just stays leaned over. It leans over nicely and just continues to hold the line very nicely. That's just up through the gears. It picks up speed nicely. No hiccups throughout the rev range. And this bike currently has 6,711 miles on it and climbing. I bought it as a non-runner, and it's been a bit of a process to get it up and running the way it should, but right now I'm at the payoff point. It just runs so nice. That 4-cylinder engine is smooth. It really picks up towards the top end of the rev range, but it doesn't, you can really kind of hustle it, but it certainly is just very, very happy tooling around at normal speeds or commuting. When I first got this bike on the road, the brakes were atrocious. You had just a lever of mush and basically no stopping power out front, and then an overly sensitive rear drum brake. And so what I've done is I've changed the travel a little bit on the rear brake so it doesn't engage as soon, and it's much more easy to modulate. I'm much less prone to stabbing it quickly and locking up the rear wheel. I moved the pedal travel down a little, and then the front brakes have been just thoroughly upgraded, and it really does stop decently for a vintage bike. Now this bike, the feel of it, it's a 1979, and I definitely feel like I'm riding something vintage. I feel like it's an older machine. Because this bike is so nimble, it's really nice to drive on these back roads. Throttle progression is very nice. It doesn't, you know, when I give it a little bit of throttle, I get a little bit of go, and as it's very progressive, as I give it more throttle, it just picks up speed. But it's very predictable. And I've ridden the first generation of CB750, and I actually have to admit that I wrecked one at one point. And that bike, the first generation CB750s, they just handled awfully. Really no feel through the suspension, and it was just, it kind of felt like it was waiting to do something to surprise you. And this bike is really the opposite of that. It's just very intuitive and so pleasant in the corners, and even if something does surprise you, you feel like it's gonna have your back instead of stab you in the back. And it's just at home on these tight, twisty Pennsylvania back roads. Yeah, I think Honda did a really nice job on this one. If I had to change anything on it, if I could change anything on it, I would go with the dual front disc brakes, just from a safety standpoint. And I would also like a disc brake in the rear. And, you know, if I can be really picky, I'd say a 6-speed transmission would just be fantastic. But I'll ride it for what it is and really enjoy it. It's so easy to drive, and just a willing partner on back roads. Just a lot of fun. What a nice place to be. All right, that was enjoyable. What a nice ride. Well,
is the Honda CB750K of 1979, the second gen CB750. Is it a worthy successor to the original? I would say Honda did a really good job with this bike. It was the successor to what is truly an iconic motorcycle, and it really is a pleasure to ride. The handling on this reminds me very much of a CB550 that I had, a mid-70s Honda CB550. But it has more power, the carburation is much smoother, and the ride and handling on it is just really top-notch. I really don't have anything to complain about. The seat is comfortable, the ergonomics aren't bad. The original handlebar had me sitting up too much, and I got a lot of wind input into the steering, and so it actually didn't feel like it handled well. And putting a little bit lower bar on it really gives me much better control. The handlebar actually allows me to exploit the good handling characteristics of the bike. I also really like the styling of this bike. I personally like the tail section on the bike. It's kind of odd looking, I guess, but I like it. I like bikes with this as opposed to just the chrome fender. After riding this Honda, once it was completely sorted out mechanically and carburation wise, I really, really like it. It's honestly one of my favorite vintage bikes to ride that I have in the garage currently. And it definitely has a vintage feel to it, but in a really good way. I'm not quite sure how to put it into words, but this bike really feels special when I ride it. I love the little cafe fairing on it, and if I want to play Ricky Racer and kind of step up the pace on a tight back road, I really can, and I can enjoy it. And then I can dial it back and enjoy just cruising through the countryside. And if I'm doing any type of highway work or a little bit higher speeds, this fairing helps with the wind blast, and I think it fits the look of the bike. It's a nice addition in my opinion. But let me know what you think. Feel free to leave comments in the comment section below. I like to respond to those as I get them. I don't know if there's anybody else out there who's a CB750K fan or working on a similar project. If you've been following along, I've done a series on the process of getting this from being a non-runner to a really good running bike. And if you followed along, you'd know that there's been times of frustration with this project. And perseverance and kind of pushing through those problems has yielded a really nice result in the end, and I'm really happy with it. So I hope you found this video entertaining and informative, and until next time, enjoy the ride.